My name is Clara Sterling. For 22 years, my life was interwoven with the threads of a company called Hearthwood Provisions. I say interwoven because my role there was less a job and more a form of quiet, persistent stitching. I wasn't an executive, nor did I have a title that shimmered with authority. I was the senior systems architect, a name that sounds grand but, in practice, meant I was the keeper of the company's digital soul. Hearthwood wasn't a sleek tech startup born in a flash of venture capital. It was an old Portland institution, a regional food distributor that had grown from a single warehouse by the Willamette River into a sprawling network that supplied half the Pacific Northwest. Its headquarters was a beautiful old brick building in the Pearl District, a place that smelled of roasted coffee beans, damp earth from the nearby river, and, on baking days, the faint, sweet ghost of cardamom from the artisan bread company we supplied. I loved that building. I knew its quirks. The floorboard that groaned like a tired old man on the third floor, the way the afternoon sun slanted through the tall, arched windows of the main conference room, turning dust motes into a galaxy of tiny, dancing stars. I started there when I was 25, fresh-faced and full of a quiet determination. The company was run by Silas Croft, a man with a handshake as firm as his principles. He believed in quality, loyalty, and the simple integrity of a promise kept. He saw something in my methodical, patient approach to the tangled mess of their early logistics software. Over 2 decades, I built, patched, and maintained the invisible infrastructure that kept Hearthwood running. I wrote the code that ensured a farmer's organic kale, picked in the misty Oregon dawn, would arrive crisp and cool on a grocer's shelf in Seattle by dusk. I designed the database that tracked every single invoice, every pallet, every driver's route. My systems were not flashy or new. They were like the old brick building itself, solid, reliable, and full of hidden passages that only I truly understood. They were a living tapestry of my life's work, and I tended to them with the care of a gardener. For 20 years, that was enough. Silas trusted me implicitly. He would often stop by my quiet corner office, a mug of coffee in his hand, and just ask, "Everything holding steady, Clara?" And I could always honestly reply, "Steady as she goes, Mr. Croft." But time, as it does, began to shift the landscape. Silas's health started to fade, and his son, Marcus, stepped into a more prominent leadership role. Marcus was a man of a different era. He had an MBA and a vocabulary peppered with words like synergy, optimization, and disruption. He saw Hearthwood not as a legacy, but as an underperforming asset. He was polite to me, but in the way one is polite to a piece of antique furniture one plans to eventually replace. The real change, the one that began the slow, painful unraveling, came on the day Marcus's wife, Serafina, was appointed Chief Strategy Officer. Serafina had not come up through the ranks. She hadn't spent late nights in the warehouse or sorted through shipping manifests. She had a background in marketing for a boutique wellness brand and a formidable presence on social media. She married Marcus after a whirlwind romance that was, by all accounts, as aesthetically pleasing as her Instagram feed. Her promotion was announced in a company-wide email that felt less like a corporate memo and more like a society page announcement. I remember the first all-hands meeting she led. She stood at the front of the conference room, the one with the beautiful arched windows, looking impeccable in a cream-colored blazer that seemed immune to wrinkles. She radiated a kind of bright, brittle energy. "Good morning, team," she began, her voice a little too loud for the room. "I am so incredibly energized to be here, to help guide Hearthwood into its next, vibrant chapter. For too long, we've been relying on what I call heritage systems." She smiled, a quick, polished flash of teeth. "It's time to sunset our legacy dependencies and pivot to a more agile, cloud-native paradigm. It's time to disrupt ourselves before the market disrupts us." A few people in the marketing department nodded enthusiastically. The rest of us, the ones from logistics, from procurement, from the warehouses, exchanged uneasy glances. I felt a familiar, quiet tightening in my chest. Her words, slick and empty as polished stones, skimmed over the complex, interwoven reality of what we did. She spoke of sunsetting my life's work as if she were talking about discontinuing a flavor of yogurt. I saw the way her eyes slid past me, past the other veterans in the room, the ones with 20 years of institutional knowledge stored not on a cloud server, but behind their eyes. She looked at us and saw dinosaurs. She didn't see the deep, gnarled roots that held the whole forest upright. She only saw old trees she wanted to clear to make way for a superhighway. In the weeks that followed, Serafina's vibrant chapter began to unfold. She hired a team of young, eager consultants who produced beautiful PowerPoint decks filled with charts and buzzwords. They recommended a complete overhaul of our entire system, a migration to a sleek, all-in-one platform called Omnicore. They promised it would streamline everything. I was asked to attend a planning meeting. I sat quietly listening as a consultant barely older than my own son clicked through slides. He pointed to a diagram that was a chaotic web of arrows and boxes. And here, he said confidently, we'll just API the existing inventory data into the new relational database. I cleared my throat softly. The inventory data isn't a single source, I explained. It's a federated system that pulls from 3 different legacy databases. One for dry goods, one for refrigerated, and one for frozen. They don't speak the same language. I wrote a series of custom scripts that act as translators. You can't just API it. It has to be carefully unstitched and rewoven. Serafina, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up. Clara, we appreciate your historical perspective, she said, her tone dripping with a condescending sweetness that was sharper than any insult. But we need to think forward. The Omnicore team assures us the migration will be seamless. We can't get bogged down in the how of the old way of doing things. She called my work the old way of doing things. She called the intricate, vital system that kept millions of dollars of perishable goods from spoiling historical perspective. I looked at her bright, unlined face, and I saw the profound, dangerous ignorance of someone who has never had to fix something they broke. I said nothing more. I just nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. In that moment, something inside me began to quietly let go. It was the first thread in the tapestry to snap. I had spent 2 decades being the silent failsafe, the human patch for every shortcut and oversight. I would work through the night to restore a corrupted server, not for the glory, but because I knew that if I didn't, a small family-run farm might not get paid that week. I held the keys to systems and processes that weren't documented anywhere but in my own mind, a quiet burden I had carried out of loyalty to Silas Croft and the company he had built. But this new company, Serafina's company, didn't want my loyalty. It didn't want my knowledge. It wanted me to be invisible, a relic to be cleared away. And so, I began to prepare for the inevitable. Not with malice, but with a kind of sad, clear-eyed pragmatism. I started documenting my work, but for myself. I carefully separated the code that was proprietary to Hearthwood from the scripts and tools I had built on my own time, my gardening tools, as I thought of them. The legal language in my original contract was old but clear. My independently developed intellectual property was my own. It was a clause Silas himself had insisted on, a mark of respect from a different time. I was sure no one, least of all Serafina, had ever bothered to read it. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a gray, drizzly Portland day. The subject line was chillingly simple, a conversation about your future with Hearthwood. It was scheduled for 4:30 p.m. The corporate witching hour. They never give you bad news in the morning. They let you work a full day, your mind on deadlines and projects, before they calmly and efficiently sever you from your life. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of strange, suspended calm. I didn't frantically back up files or send cryptic warnings to my colleagues. I simply did my work. I answered an email from Sophia in the southern warehouse about a recurring glitch in the refrigerated truck sensors. I ran a final diagnostic on the payroll server. I was like a sailor making sure all the knots were tied, all the sails were furled, before abandoning a ship that was being deliberately steered toward an iceberg. At 4:25, I watered the small jade plant on my windowsill, a plant that had grown from a single leaf into a robust, miniature tree over the past 10 years. I wiped a speck of dust from its leaves. Then I walked to the HR office on the top floor. Serafina was there, perched on the edge of the desk, a stark contrast to Robert, the HR manager, who looked pale and uncomfortable in his chair. The room was sterile and smelled of air freshener and anxiety. "Clara, thank you for coming," Serafina began, her voice smooth and practiced. She had rehearsed this. "As you know, we're entering a bold new phase at Hearthwood. We're restructuring to create a more agile, future-focused organization." She used the word agile like an incantation. I just listened, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I felt strangely outside of my own body, watching a scene unfold from a great distance. As part of this restructuring, Robert picked up, sliding a thick, branded folder across the table toward me. "We are eliminating certain legacy positions that no longer align with our strategic vision." Legacy positions. That was me. I was a legacy position. Serafina leaned forward, arranging her face into an expression of synthetic sympathy. "We are so grateful for your many years of dedication, Clara," she said. "But the truth is, the company has outgrown the need for your specific role. We're moving everything to OmniCore. It's all automated now." The lie was so blatant, so breathtakingly audacious, that I almost laughed. They hadn't even started the migration. The consultants had produced a plan, but not a single line of old code had been touched. She was firing the one person who could have possibly helped them navigate the transition, all because my very presence was a quiet rebuke to her glossy, superficial vision. Robert cleared his throat and pointed to the folder. "There's a generous severance package in there, Clara. It includes 3 months' salary and extended benefits. We just need you to sign the standard departure agreement." I opened the folder and glanced at the papers. The words swam before my eyes: non-disclosure, non-compete, waiver of claims. I thought of the late nights, the weekends, the family dinners I'd missed to fix a problem no one else even knew existed. I thought of Silas Croft's firm handshake and his steady, respectful gaze. All of it reduced to this: a transaction. "Do you have any questions?" Serafina asked, a hint of impatience in her voice. She was ready for this to be over so she could post about her productive day on LinkedIn. I slowly closed the folder and pushed it back across the desk. I looked directly at her, not with anger, but with a deep, weary clarity. "No, Serafina," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't have any questions." I stood up, my movements deliberate. I unclipped my security badge from my belt and placed it gently on the table next to the folder. It made a soft, final click. "I wish you the best of luck with the migration." Then I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I walked down the silent, carpeted hallway, past the portraits of the company's founders, past the conference room with its beautiful arched windows, now dark against the evening sky. I didn't slam any doors. I didn't make a scene. My departure was as quiet as my long years of service. But I knew, with the certainty of a gathering storm, that the silence I left behind would soon become deafening. I didn't go home. The thought of facing the quiet sympathy in my husband's eyes was too much to bear just yet. Instead, I drove to a small cafe I loved, a place called the Gilded Fern. It was tucked away on a side street, warm and inviting, with mismatched wooden chairs and the comforting smell of old books and brewing tea. Rain was beginning to fall, streaking the windows and blurring the city lights into soft pastels. It was the perfect place to feel invisible. I ordered a chamomile tea and a slice of lemon poppy seed cake I had no intention of eating. I found a small table in the corner, by a window looking out onto the rain-slicked street. The warmth of the mug seeped into my cold hands. I sat there, watching the rain, and for the first time since leaving the office, I allowed the full weight of what had just happened to settle over me. It wasn't anger that I felt, not yet. It was a profound, hollowed-out grief. Hearthwood had been more than a job. It was the place where I had built something, where I had mattered, even if no one else truly saw it. It was a part of my identity. To be dismissed so casually, so thoughtlessly, felt like a repudiation of my entire professional life. My work, my care, my quiet dedication, erased by a buzzword and a blazer. My phone, sitting face down on the table, was silent. No calls. No frantic texts. Just the gentle hum of the cafe and the drumming of the rain. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of doubt. Had I been wrong? Should I have fought? Pleaded my case? Listed every crisis I had averted, every disaster I had single-handedly prevented. My hand twitched toward my purse, where my work laptop was still stowed. The old instincts, honed over 22 years, surged to the surface. I should write up a transition document. I should email Sophia at the warehouse about that sensor glitch. I should send a note to the accounting team reminding them about the manual reconciliation needed at the end of the fiscal quarter. The urge to fix, to smooth the way, was a physical pull, a deep, ingrained habit. I was the keeper of the institutional memory, and I had just walked out the door with the library key in my pocket. I pictured the systems I had built. They weren't designed to fail. But they were intricate, full of dependencies and custom patches that I had layered on over the years like coats of varnish on old wood. They needed tending. There was a script I ran manually every Tuesday morning to purge orphan data from the order fulfillment queue. Without it, the queue would slowly, imperceptibly, begin to clog. There was a security certificate for a key vendor portal that needed a manual renewal every 90 days, a task I always handled myself because the automated reminder system was faulty. That renewal was due next Monday. These weren't traps I had set. They were simply the realities of an old, complex system, the digital equivalent of a historic building that needs a knowing hand to keep the plumbing from leaking. I had been that hand. And now I was gone. I took a sip of my tea. The warmth was soothing. I closed my eyes and pictured Serafina's face, her confident, dismissive smile. It's all automated now. She had no idea. She and her team of consultants, with their glossy decks and their talk of seamless integration, were flying a jumbo jet, believing it was on autopilot, not realizing that the pilot had just been ejected and they were holding a flight manual for a different plane. The guilt was still there, a low hum beneath the grief. What about Sophia? What about the drivers? What about the dozens of good, hard-working people who would be caught in the fallout? But then another thought, clearer and sharper, cut through the fog. They chose this. Marcus and Serafina chose to value aesthetics over substance, jargon over knowledge. Silas Croft had built a company on a foundation of trust and respect. His son was letting it crumble in favor of a prettier facade. My job had been to keep the foundation strong. It was no longer my job. My new job, I realized with a sudden, startling clarity, was to take care of Clara Sterling. To respect my own work, even if others hadn't. To honor my own worth. I picked up my phone, not to call the office, but to text my husband. It happened, I wrote. I'm okay. At the Gilded Fern. Could you meet me here when you're done with work? His reply was instantaneous. Leaving now. Order me a coffee. A small, watery smile touched my lips. I wouldn't be going through this alone. I took a bite of the lemon poppy seed cake. It was sweet and tangy, a small burst of brightness in the gray afternoon. The rain continued to fall, washing the city clean. And for the first time, I began to feel not the grief of an ending, but the quiet, terrifying, and exhilarating possibility of a new beginning. I had walked away from the house I had spent my life tending. Now I had to learn to build my own. The first tremor came on Friday, 3 days after my departure. It wasn't a catastrophic quake, just a faint, distant rumble that only I would have recognized. It came in the form of a text message from Sophia, the warehouse manager from Southern Oregon. Sophia, Clara, hope you're doing well. Quick weird question. The logs for the refrigerated units on the Baker City run are showing blank. Hasn't happened before. Any ideas? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The old Clara would have replied instantly with a precise set of instructions, a diagnostic command to run, a server to reboot. It was a simple fix, a known bug in the sensor reporting I usually cleared out manually at the end of each week. I typed out a reply. Hi Sophia, I'm no longer with Hearthwood. You'll have to file a ticket with the IT help desk. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the send button. It felt cold, impersonal. Sophia was my friend. We'd shared stories about our kids over the phone for 15 years. I deleted the message and tried again. Hi Sophia. So good to hear from you. I'm actually no longer with Hearthwood as of Tuesday. I'm sorry, but I can't help with the logs. I'd suggest you contact the new IT team. I hope you're doing well. It was still a deflection, but it was a kinder one. I hit send, a knot of guilt and resolve tightening in my stomach. I was drawing a boundary. It felt unnatural, like trying to write with my left hand, but I knew it was necessary. Her reply was swift. Sophia, what? They let you go? Are they insane? Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry. The place will fall apart without you. Her words were a balm and a burden. It was validating to be missed, but it also underscored the responsibility I had shed. I spent the weekend trying not to think about it, focusing on my garden, feeling the solid, real earth under my fingernails. My husband and I took a long walk in Forest Park, the air thick with the scent of damp soil and pine. I was trying to deprogram myself, to untangle my sense of self-worth from my ability to solve Hearthwood's problems. On Monday morning, the real storm hit. It started with the vendor portal, the one whose security certificate was due for renewal. At 9:05 a.m., our largest supplier of organic dairy, a cooperative of over 50 family farms, was locked out. They couldn't upload their new inventory, which meant they couldn't create shipping orders. Which meant 3 truckloads of milk, cheese, and yogurt were sitting in a holding facility with no destination. I knew this not because I was watching, but because my phone started to buzz. First, a call from a number I didn't recognize, a panicked logistics coordinator from the dairy co-op. I let it go to voicemail. Then, an email from a former colleague in accounting, his tone bordering on frantic. Subject, urgent, vendor lockout. Clara, I know you're gone, and I'm so sorry to bother you, but nobody here knows how to fix the AgriFresh portal. Serafina's team is useless. They keep saying it's a problem on the vendor's end, but AgriFresh says it's us. Do you know anything about a certificate renewal? We're about to lose the entire weekly shipment. I read the email and felt a cold dread mixed with a grim sense of vindication. I took a deep breath and archived it without replying. It wasn't my fire to put out. By noon, the problem had cascaded. The stalled dairy shipment created a backlog in the refrigerated warehouse. The order fulfillment queue, which I hadn't purged the previous week, had become so clogged with orphan data that it began to time out, rejecting new orders. Grocers who were expecting their morning dairy delivery received nothing. The customer service lines lit up. I imagined the scene inside the old brick building. The open-plan office, once humming with productive energy, now likely buzzing with a frantic, chaotic panic. I pictured Serafina, her chic blazer starting to look less like a power suit and more like a costume, striding around demanding answers from people who had none. I could almost hear her voice, strained with a forced brightness, assuring everyone that her agile team had it under control. The consultants she'd hired, the ones who were so good at making PowerPoint decks, were likely discovering the vast, terrifying difference between a theoretical system on a slide and a living, breathing, cantankerous one built from 2 decades of patches and prayer. They would be looking for a single off switch, not realizing it was 1,000 tiny, interconnected threads that had come loose. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Clara, this is Serafina Croft. I understand your departure was abrupt, but we have a critical situation here that seems to stem from systems you managed. I need you to call me immediately to walk our team through the vendor access protocols. There was no please. No hello. Just a demand. The sheer arrogance of it was stunning. She had fired me, told me my role was obsolete, and now she was ordering me to fix the mess her ignorance had created. I set my phone down on the kitchen counter and went back to pruning my roses. The thorns pricked my fingers, a sharp, grounding sensation. Each snip of the shears felt like severing another invisible cord that tied me to that place. The messages kept coming. A LinkedIn request from one of the consultants. An email from Marcus Croft himself, his tone more conciliatory, but still laced with an undercurrent of urgency. Clara, we seem to be experiencing some legacy system challenges. I'd be happy to discuss a temporary consulting agreement to help us through this transition. They wanted to pay me to fix the problem they had created by firing me. The irony was so thick I could taste it. But the message that finally broke through my carefully constructed wall of silence came late in the afternoon. It was an email from Silas Croft. He must have heard about the chaos from an old contact. The subject line was just my name. Clara, the email read. I was so sorry to hear you've left us. I know things have been changing, and perhaps I haven't been paying enough attention. I've heard we're in some trouble today. If you're willing, I would consider it a great personal favor if you would call me. Not as the CEO, but as your old friend. My heart ached. This was different. This wasn't about the company, about the money, about Serafina's ego. This was about Silas. A man I respected deeply, a man who had always treated me with kindness and dignity. My husband found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the phone, my teacup cold. He put a hand on my shoulder. What is it? It's from Silas, I whispered. He's asking for my help. What are you going to do? He asked softly, no judgment in his voice. I looked out the window at my garden, at the orderly rows of plants, the carefully tended flower beds. I had built that garden with patience and care, just as I had built the systems at Hearthwood. But this garden was mine. No one could dismiss it, or tell me it was obsolete, or fire me from it. I finally knew what I had to do. It was time to have one last conversation, not to fix their problems, but to finally and completely claim my own peace. I picked up the phone and dialed Silas Croft's number. The line clicked, and his voice came through, weaker than I remembered, but still resonant with a familiar warmth. Clara. Hello, Silas, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. It's good to hear your voice. And yours, my dear. And yours, he said, a sigh heavy with regret traveling down the line. Clara, I seem to have made a mess of things. Or rather, I allowed a mess to be made. I've been hearing reports all day. The dairy co-op, the fulfillment system. It sounds like chaos. I've heard a few things, I admitted quietly. They're telling me it has to do with your departure, he said, his voice laced with a pained confusion. Serafina. Marcus. They seem to think you did something on your way out. A flicker of the old anger, hot and sharp, flared within me. Silas, you know me better than that, I said, my voice rising slightly. I worked for you for 22 years. I have never, not once, sabotaged anything. I walked out of that building with my head held high and my integrity intact. What's happening now is not because of something I did. It's because of all the things I am no longer doing. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him in his study, surrounded by books and old photographs, a man from a bygone era grappling with the consequences of a modern folly. Explain it to me, Clara, he finally said, his voice humbled. Help me understand. And so I did. I didn't use jargon or technical terms. I used the simple, clear language he understood. I told him about the garden. Imagine, Silas, I began, that for 20 years, I was the head gardener for a vast and complicated estate. I knew every plant, every secret path, every leaky pipe in the irrigation system. I knew which roses needed special food and which gate needed to be oiled every week so it wouldn't rust shut. I did it quietly, without being asked, because I loved the garden and I wanted it to thrive. I know you did, Clara, he murmured. Then, a new manager came in, I continued, my voice even. And she looked at my work and called it legacy gardening. She wanted to rip out the old plants and install a new, automated hydroponic system she'd read about in a magazine. She didn't want to learn from the old gardener. She told me my knowledge was historical, that my role was obsolete. And then she fired me. So, what happened to the garden? I asked, pausing for effect. I didn't poison the soil. I didn't salt the earth. I just stopped gardening. I took my personal tools, the ones I'd made myself, and I went home. And now, the roses are wilting. The gate has rusted shut. The pipes are leaking. The garden is not failing because of an act of sabotage. It's failing from an act of neglect. A neglect that began long before I walked out the door. The silence that followed was profound. I had said my piece. I had told my truth. I felt a sense of release, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I see, Silas said at last, his voice thick with emotion. I see it all now. My God, Clara. What have we done? He cleared his throat. Can it be fixed? If we, could you come back? Name your price. Name your title. Chief Technical Officer. Whatever you want. We need you. It was the offer I might have dreamed of a month ago. The validation, the respect, the authority. But hearing it now, it felt like an invitation to return to a house that was no longer my home. Silas, I said, and my voice was gentle, full of a sad, final affection. I can't. I'm so sorry, but I can't. That part of my life is over. I spent 22 years tending the garden. Now, I need to tend my own. I could hear him take a shaky breath. I understand, he said, and I knew that he truly did. I wish you nothing but the best, Clara. You were the best of us. I'm sorry I forgot that. Goodbye, Silas, I said softly. Goodbye, my friend. I ended the call and sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window. There was no triumph, no bitter satisfaction. Just a clean, quiet peace. The phone buzzed again on the table, another text from Serafina, no doubt. I picked it up, but instead of reading it, I powered it off. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. A week later, I accepted a position. It wasn't a high-powered corporate job. It was with a local nonprofit that ran community gardens and food education programs for underprivileged kids in the Portland area. They needed someone to build a simple, robust system to manage their volunteers, track their planting schedules, and coordinate food distribution. They didn't have much money, but their eyes lit up when I spoke. They didn't see a legacy position. They saw a person with deep knowledge and a patient heart. They saw my worth. I heard through the grapevine that Hearthwood Provisions managed to survive. They ended up paying an exorbitant amount of money to an outside firm to painstakingly rebuild what they had so carelessly thrown away. Serafina was quietly reassigned to a vague marketing role with no direct reports, a gentle corporate exile. The company learned a hard lesson, written in red ink on their balance sheets. Sometimes, on my way to one of the community gardens, I drive past the old brick building by the river. It looks the same, solid and steadfast. I feel no anger, no resentment. Just a faint, wistful memory of the person I used to be, the quiet woman who kept the secrets of the building's soul. I am grateful for the years I spent there, for the skills I learned, for the quiet pride I took in my work. But I am more grateful for the strength I found to walk away. My new work is different. It's smaller, quieter. But when I watch a child's face light up as they pull their first carrot from the rich, dark earth, I know I am building something that will truly last. I am no longer the invisible root system holding up someone else's forest. I am the gardener, in my own garden, planting seeds in the sun. And I am finally, peacefully, gloriously, watching them grow.